Tonight, we're going to take a journey back to a much darker time. Not to the world of castles and grand halls, but into the shadowed streets where plague doctors once walked, clad in their strange masks and heavy robes, carrying both hope and fear in their hands. You are going to drift through the life of one such doctor. You'll feel what it was like to come face to face with sickness and death day after day, to wear that infamous beaked mask, and to walk that razor-thin line between being a healer and an outcast during one of history's most devastating pandemics. If this is the kind of slow, immersive story that helps you find rest and relaxation, please feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you some peace. And maybe drop a comment to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. There's a quiet comfort in knowing who else is out there, somewhere in the world, falling asleep to the very same story. So let the lights dim, feel the heavy robes settle around you, and let's step together into the world of the Plague Doctor. And now let us begin. The year is 1656, and congratulations. You have just been hired as a plague doctor. You're not entirely sure how this came to be. It's possible you were out of work and simply desperate. Perhaps someone in the town hall misread your name in the ledger and mistook you for a properly trained physician. Or maybe, and this is the most likely reason, it's because absolutely no one else was willing to do it. Whatever the case, you are now the proud new owner of what is arguably the worst job in all of Europe. Your town is thrilled to have you. You are considerably less so. The very first thing they give you isn't a warm welcome or a firm handshake. Heavens no. They hand you a pouch filled with coins, paid in advance, because statistically speaking, you are not expected to survive long enough to collect your wages later. The gesture feels generous, but in a deeply suspicious kind of way. It's like a man handing you a lantern and sending you into a mine that he knows is already on fire. They assure you, of course, that it's a highly honorable appointment. You have been chosen, they say, to serve the people in their greatest time of need, which is really just a polite way of saying that you'll be surrounded by corpses before the week is even out. Now it's time to get you suited up. There is no official training, naturally, no school to attend, no mentor to guide you, no handbook to study, but there is an outfit. Oh yes, there is the outfit. First, you pull on a pair of thick leather breeches that smell like a dead cow that's been rolled in vinegar. These are supposedly meant to protect you from the bad air, the miasma, though you don't understand how exactly. Then comes a long, oil-soaked cloak, black and heavy and slick to the touch. This is your outer shell, designed to repel water and, allegedly, death itself. Over your hands you pull on gloves, and on your head you place a wide-brimmed leather hat. This is meant to identify you as a man of medicine, which again is more about creating an appearance than reflecting any real accuracy. And then the mask. You slide the beaked contraption over your face, carefully securing the straps at the back of your head. The beak is 6 inches long and curved like a bird's, and it's stuffed full of herbs, spices and ingredients that sound less like medicine and more like the contents of a cursed spice rack. There are rose petals, cinnamon bark, cloves, and perhaps a little mint or camphor if you happen to be lucky. Some doctors even include crushed emeralds or powdered viper flesh, just in case a bit of superstition turns out to be correct after all. Inside that beak, the air is stale and has a sickly sweet smell. The herbs are supposed to protect you, to filter out the foul stench of rot, to cleanse the miasma that is believed to carry the disease. The prevailing theory is quite simple. Bad smells are dangerous, and good smells will keep you safe. You are effectively a walking sachet. Your vision is obscured by the mask's round glass eyepieces, which immediately begin to fog with every breath you take. They press against your skin with an itchy tightness that you cannot scratch. You cannot sneeze. You cannot see much of anything with any real clarity, but you're ready. They hand you a wooden cane. You weren't expecting this, but it comes with the job. This cane is a multi-purpose tool. It allows you to examine your patients from a safe distance, to lift their blankets, to prod at lumps, or to gently tap a foot to see if it still has a twitch of life in it. But it also has another, more grim function. Should you find yourself surrounded by desperate, plague-stricken townspeople, crying, screaming, clawing for your help, this stick is your only real defense. You are not just a healer, you are also a moving target. You begin your rounds. The streets are mostly silent. A few shutters creak in the afternoon breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls, not for a service, but for a body. The carts have already made their rounds this morning, their heavy wheels leaving deep, muddy tracks behind them. Each one of those carts was piled high with corpses, some wrapped in sheets, others left bare. A few looked peaceful in death. Most did not. You arrive at your first home, your first. A servant meets you at the threshold, holding a cloth over his mouth. He simply gestures toward a room in the back of the house. The smell hits you before you even open the door, a sickening blend of sweat, vomit, and decay. You steel yourself and step inside. The woman is lying still on the bed, her skin pale and waxy. A lump, a bubo, bulges beneath her neck, angry and red. It's unmistakable. Her eyes flicker beneath her closed lids. She's burning with fever, and her breath comes in shallow, desperate gasps. You approach, extend your cane, and gently prod the swelling. A thin stream of pus leaks out. You nod, not because it does any good, but because it is what people expect you to do. Her husband stands nearby, his eyes both hopeful and hollow. You don't speak much. You mutter something about her humours being out of balance. You prescribe a poultice of crushed herbs and advise him to burn rosemary in the corners of the room. You suggest keeping a sliced onion nearby to absorb the illness from the air. He thanks you, his voice cracking, as if you've just offered him salvation. You haven't. You record the visit in your small notebook. You use only initials instead of names. There are far too many patients now, and using names makes it all feel too personal. You cannot afford to let it become personal. As you are leaving, you notice a small child sitting in the hallway, silent and perfectly still. His eyes track you as you pass. He doesn't move. You suspect he is already infected. You don't say a word. What would be the point? You continue on down the road, checking on homes that have been marked with charcoal crosses. Some doors are barred shut, while others hang ajar. In a few, families are still inside, clutching loved ones who no longer breathe. They ask you for help. You give them herbs. You give them words. You give them the illusion of care. At one point, a man rushes towards you from an alley, frantic and coughing. He grabs your arm. You feel a jolt of fear before anything else. You raise your stick, not to strike him hard, just enough to make him back away. He stumbles, apologizes, and starts weeping. He tells you his wife is ill. He tells you he's scared. You just nod and follow him. Her bubo has already burst. She will not last through the night. You give her a prayer. You give him a list of things to burn. You move on. By the afternoon, you have seen a dozen homes. Some people greet you with a flicker of hope, others with deep suspicion. One old woman spits at your feet and tells you that you are death in disguise. You don't disagree with her. You return to your quarters at dusk. They are modest, just a single room above a shuttered bakery. You enter carefully, removing each layer of your clothing with a practiced, precise ritual. The gloves come off first, then the cloak, now stiff with dried sweat and stained at the hem. Then comes the mask. You hang everything near the hearth, letting the smoke dry what little moisture remains. Your face is red and chafed from the mask's straps. Your eyes sting. You wash your hands 3 times, scrubbing until your skin burns. You inspect your arms and your neck for any signs. No lumps, no fever, not yet. You light a single candle and sit down at your desk. Your notebook lies open, its pages marked with scrolled observations, crude drawings of boils and rashes. You try to organize your thoughts, but they all blur together. All the patients are running together now, the same symptoms, the same endings. You eat a small piece of bread. You sip some weak wine. You listen to the muffled quiet of a city that is slowly dying. Outside, the wind begins to pick up. Somewhere, a scream echoes, brief, and then cut short. You say a prayer, not because you believe it will actually help, but because it's the only ritual you have left. You think of the woman from earlier. You think of her husband, who still believes you can save her. You think of the child in the hallway. Then you force yourself to stop thinking. You must, because tomorrow you will have to put on the mask again and go out to face the plague once more. The dawn light seeps through your shutters, but it brings you no comfort. It only serves to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the still air, a silent testament to the fact that life itself has been put on hold. You don your gear in the near darkness, the oil-soaked cloak as stiff as cured leather, gloves pulled snug over your hands, your hat tilted low, and then the mask, the very thing you both loathe and rely upon. You settle the beak between your nostrils, inhale the stale bouquet of crushed rose petals, myrrh and vinegar, and you step out into the morning's hush. Outside, the streets are almost unrecognizable. Market stalls stand abandoned, their wooden frames half collapsed under the sheer weight of disuse. A broken barrel of apples lies rotting in the gutter, pale worms crawling over its fermenting flesh. The once cheerful cries of street vendors have been replaced by the distant, solemn tolling of church bells. What was once a call to worship is now the sombre, relentless clock of mortality. Every 12 hours, a new death. Every 12 hours, a new mark in the ledger. You pause beside a boarded-up bakery where the sweet, clamouring scent of fresh bread has been replaced by the smell of decay. Rats dart across the cobblestones, emboldened by the empty streets and the overflowing refuge heaps. They don't wait for twilight anymore. They roam freely in the sunshine, scuttling underfoot as you pass. You recall a rumour you heard just yesterday that the plague is borne on fleas, riding from rat to human like some kind of secret courier. You almost laugh at the image, but the truth of it claws at your mind. Even if it sounds laughable, it might just be real. At the corner, a crude red X marks a house. No family dares to erase it. It is both a warning and a condemnation. You knock once with your cane. A frail voice bids you to enter. Inside, the smell hits you like a fist. Fermented sweat, sickly sweet breath, and something sour underneath it all. The patient is waiting in a darkened room. A merchant, you are told, too proud to show his face in a public death pit. He's propped up on a makeshift cot, his eyes dull, his skin mottled with purple blotches. A bubo swells grotesquely beneath his arm, black at its crown, weeping a thin, oily fluid. You clear your throat. He glances up as if he's surprised you've actually come. "Doctor," he croaks, "is it as I fear?" You study his pulse. It's rapid, fluttering. You listen to his breath. It's wet and rattling. You say quietly, "It is the plague." This isn't news to him. He nods, as if bracing himself for a verdict he already knew was coming. You slip a cloth soaked in rosemary oil to his lips and set a small pot of vinegar near his pillow. "Keep your chamber aired," you advise. "Burn juniper in the corners. Pray if you must." He manages a weak smile. "I shall." You leave him to his fading dignity and step back out into the street. The sunlight feels colder than the night did. You glance at the red X and move on. Mid-morning finds you at the canal bank, where workers are hauling bodies into waiting barges. The water laps lazily against the stone, ignorant of the human suffering it ferries away. You see a body, wrapped in sailcloth, get pushed over the edge with a rough shove. It floats for a moment, face half submerged, eyes staring blankly at the sky. Then it slips beneath the surface, swallowed by the canal's dark mirror. The men say they are grateful for the duty. It's honest work, paid weekly, and one hopes the plague will avoid them in return for their service. But you have seen more bargemen dead than alive this past month. You move on to the next scene, a makeshift quarantine station set up in the old monastery. The pews have all been removed to make room for rows upon rows of cots. Smoke from burning rosemary coils up towards the vaulted ceiling. Patients lie wrapped in shrouds of white linen. Some of them moan, others just stare at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster. A young novice tends to them, his hands shaking behind a half-mask made of cloth. You exchange a silent greeting, and then you begin your rounds. First, an elderly widow. Her gaze is bright, unnervingly so. She grips the bars of her cot, her foot tapping with a nervous energy.
"My dear," she says when you kneel beside her, "I keep expecting a knight in shining armour, but I suppose you'll have to do." You offer her a pale smile from beneath your beaked facade. "I'm all sorts of armour, I'm afraid." She chuckles, and just for a moment, the horror seems to soften.
You prod her bubo lightly with your cane. It's firm, hot to the touch. "Plenty of rest," you tell her, "and drink broth if you can manage it." She nods and grips your hand, leather glove and all, as if it were a bard's lute, offering some strange comfort in this cruel world. Next is a young labourer, his body rejuvenated only slightly by your own grim reflection. You press on. A cluster of homes by the slaughterhouse block beckons, a place even more foul than the rest of the city. You enter the first one, where a man sits among overturned chairs, clutching his bleeding arm. He tried bloodletting himself, he says, attempting to cut away the poison. A bandage covers the wound, already stained through. You take his arm, inspect the makeshift tourniquet, and you shake your head. "You're weakening yourself," you say. "Stop. Rest."
"Let nature run its course." He scowls at you, but silent exhaustion wins the argument. You apply a fresh poultice, noting the rash that is creeping up his sleeve. Next door, a mother tends to her hobbling son, whose leg is swollen grotesquely. He limps over to you, his head held high.
"You'll clear your throat," he says. "I should be in the fields." You nod, managing to convey some sympathy through your beak. "Soon," you say, "when you're well." His mother's eyes flicker with hope. You don't allow yourself to see how hollow that hope is. A few doors down, you find a makeshift clinic where local barbers and apothecaries are arguing over the best remedy. Bloodletting versus poultices soaked in mercury. You intervene gently, explaining the dangers of mercury exposure, suggesting gentler infusions of elderflower tea instead. They grumble, but they defer to you. You note their names: Brother Matteo, Signor Luca. Disagreements like these may end up killing more people than the plague itself. You walk on. The late afternoon shadows stretch long across the streets. You decide to make one final stop, the orphaned plague pit at the very edge of town. Here, bodies are interred in long trenches. Coffins are an unnecessary luxury. You have never witnessed the diggers at work. No one dares to. Today, you will. You approach, mask ready, your cane tapping on the ground. Two men in tattered cloaks stand at the edge of a freshly honed trench. They are throwing bodies in like refuse. A child's small body lands last. You pause and you catch its shoe as it slips off. The men glare at you, you drop it, they toss the body in. The pit echoes with muffled thuds. You lower your head in prayer. You do not know which deity might still be listening. You pray nonetheless. On your way home, you pass the chapel. Half of its roof has collapsed, its walls blackened by smoke from the nearby burnings. A discarded prayer book lies open in the dirt, its pages fluttering in the breeze. You read an incantation, half erased by ash. Deliver us from plague and pestilence. You close it gently and set it on a ledge. Perhaps someone will return for it, perhaps not. Night falls before you reach your lodgings. You enter, you remove each piece of your gear, you hang them up to air out. The mask peers at you from its hook, as if it's mocking you. You scrub your hands raw, yank the heavy cloak off, and strip down. You check your skin for lumps. None yet. Good. You sit at your desk in the candlelight and write. And today visited 18 households. Recorded 32 cases, 5 recoveries unlikely, 27 critical, 11 deceased. Observations: miasma thicker near slaughterhouse. Rats congregate at the canal bank. Children less symptomatic but are likely carriers. Remedies: continued fumigation with juniper. Discourage bloodletting. Next, petition for additional leeches. You close the ledger. You try not to think about tomorrow. How many more will die? How many more questions will you be unable to answer? You blow out the candle and lie down, your robe still on. Your chest aches. You cough twice into the darkness. The world is dying, and you in your mask and your cloak can only bear witness once more. You sit by the fire, your mask resting on the table beside you. It stares up at you with its hollow glass eyes and its long, curved beak. A grotesque parody of a bird's skull, painted and waxed and stuffed with pungent herbs. You have worn this thing every single day for months now. You have eaten in it, you have slept beside it, you have spoken to the dying through it. You can't even remember what your own voice sounds like anymore without the hollow echo of that snout warping it into something else. And still, after all this time, you're not even sure if the thing actually works. The townspeople certainly fear it, of course. Children begin to cry the moment they see you. Dogs bark. Even the dying flinch at the sight of you. You look like death itself come walking, tall and shapeless, cloaked in black, with a bird's face looming above the ever-present stink of pestilence. And maybe, in a way, that's the whole point. If nothing else, the mask is honest. It doesn't offer any false hope. It offers a warning. You are not salvation. You are the man who comes when all else has failed. And the irony, of course, is that this mask, the most iconic symbol of the plague doctor, is barely older than your own apprenticeship. People speak of it as if it's some ancient relic, as if every doctor during the time of the Black Death wore one. But the truth is, the bird mask is a recent invention. You are walking right through the middle of its debut performance. The older doctors didn't have these. Back in the 14th century, physicians would simply tie cloths around their faces or carry pomanders, which were little metal balls filled with herbs to sniff whenever the air got too foul. Theories of disease were based on balance and smell and the wrath of God, not on bacteria. And it wasn't until men like Charles de Lorme, a French court physician of all people, got the bright idea to turn those pomanders into something wearable. He was the one who designed this whole get-up for royal doctors during outbreaks in Paris and Rome. A long overcoat coated in wax, gloves and boots made from Moroccan leather, a hat to show your profession, and the beak, always the beak. 1/2 foot long, curved like a carrion bird's, stuffed with whatever fragrant nonsense you could possibly find. Rose petals, cloves, cinnamon, a vinegar-soaked cloth, powdered viper flesh, if you fancied yourself to be particularly daring. The logic, of course, was considered sound by the standards of the time. Everyone believed in the miasma, the bad air that was corrupted by decay, floating invisibly through the streets and seeping into your very lungs. The plague, they all said, lived in this air. It clung to the sewage, it clung to the corpses, it rose up from the ground after too much rain. So if the air was the problem, then purifying that air must be the solution. Thus the mask. It had 2 small breathing holes near the nostrils, and between them and your lungs was a stuffed wall of theriac, a concoction of more than 50 different ingredients, all blended into a single, overpowering perfume. The very same mixture, in fact, was sometimes fed to the patients. You would stuff it into your beak and just hope that it kept the death away. And in a strange, accidental way, it may have actually helped. The beak put distance between your face and the patient. The robes, sealed with wax and sweat, kept out fleas and bodily fluids. The gloves and the stick let you avoid touching them. The glass-covered eyes protected you from spittle and smoke. You weren't protected from everything, certainly not from the real cause, Yersinia pestis, the tiny, invisible bacterium carried by fleas on the backs of rats. But you were shielded more than you knew. The outfit, as ridiculous as it looked, functioned as a rudimentary hazmat suit, centuries before germ theory would ever explain why it mattered. Not that any of this made you feel any safer. For all of its layers, the mask is suffocating. The herbs inside turn sour within a day. The vinegar stings your eyes. The waxed robes make you sweat until your underclothes are completely soaked. You walk like a statue, your arms stiff, your breath ragged behind a wall of rotten flowers. Sometimes, after hours on your feet, you forget you're even wearing it, until a child screams or a horse rears back, or a man grabs your sleeve and calls you crowface. Then you remember. And still the myths swirl around you like flies around the corpse cart. One man insisted to you that your mask was cursed, that its very shape summoned death like a sigil carved into flesh. Another claimed you were no doctor at all, but a sorcerer, keeping the plague inside the beak and releasing it house by house. More than once you have been followed through the alleys by men muttering prayers, clutching crucifixes as if your presence alone could damn their souls. You understand why the mask unsettles them. It has no expression, no human warmth. It is entirely functional, and when you speak, your voice becomes inhuman, hollow and muffled, drifting like a ghost across the gaps between rooms. But what else are you meant to wear? A smile? A wreath of healing herbs and hope? The dying don't need to be comforted with illusions. They need to see the truth, that this is a war, and that you, just like them, are just trying not to be the next casualty. Once a barber surgeon mocked your mask openly in the tavern, said you looked like a fool. He claimed his apron and his saw were more honest tools than your crow costume. He offered to bleed a bubo right then and there, bet you a week's wages that he could cure what your mask could only smell. 3 days later, he was dead. His assistant took over the practice and stopped laughing. There is a madness in the air now, not just sickness. You see it in the way people treat you. Some recoil as you pass, clutching at their rosaries and spitting in your shadow. Others reach out and grab you, wailing for help, for prayers, for a miracle. They think the mask gives you some kind of power, that behind it you are not just a man, but something more. You wish they were right. You remember a girl, maybe 8, maybe 10, who once asked if she could try on your mask. Her mother lay in the next room, already gone. The girl didn't cry. She just wanted to know what it felt like to be the one who doesn't die. You let her hold it, just briefly. It was too heavy for her. She gave it back to you, without a word. Later that night you passed her house again and found the door marked with ash. There are days now when you forget what your own face even looks like. You shave by touch. You avoid mirrors. When you remove the mask at night, it leaves red lines along your cheeks, a ring of indentations where the straps have cut deep. You wash it daily, but the smell never fades, a blend of sweat, resin, herbs, and time. It is your second face. You wear it as often as your own. And yet, you suspect that years from now, when the plague has finally burned itself out, and this town has rebuilt itself on top of its own bones, people will remember the mask more than they will ever remember the medicine, the beak, the black robes, the man who looked like death and arrived too late to stop it. They will tell stories. They will say you appeared like a spirit in times of sickness, that you walked among the dying with herbs in your nose and blood on your gloves, that you saved lives or you took them, that you were a healer or a demon. But the truth is much simpler. You are tired, you are sweating, you are hungry and afraid, and you are trying not to cough in a way that feels too deep in your lungs. You are not a monster or a miracle. You are just a man in a mask. And you're already wondering what you will do when the herbs finally run out. You begin each morning in the same way by opening your medical kit and staring into it as if it holds all the answers to the universe. It doesn't. It barely holds the answers to splinters. Inside is a jumble of instruments, each one more questionable than the last. A bronze lancet, slightly bent at the tip. A cloth pouch of dried leeches, some of them still alive, most of them not. Glass bottles with no labels, just streaks of something that once looked like medicine. A wax-sealed scroll of proven remedies, written in a Latin so mangled that even the local priest gave up halfway through trying to read it aloud. And at the bottom, your favourite, a small wooden spoon. Its purpose is unknown, perhaps it's symbolic. This is what you are expected to fight the plague with. You take inventory as if it actually matters. 1 jar of vinegar, a lump of hardened sweet to rub into your cloak, a tin of theriac, a preparation of herbs and honey, and, according to rumour, a dash of snake. You sniff it. It smells like despair. Still, it's better than what the patients you'll be seeing today smell like. You set off, your tools tucked under your arm, like a scholar bringing his books to a lecture. Only you are the scholar, the lecturer, and the poor soul who is scheduled to fail the exam, all in one. Your first visit is to a cooper, or what was a cooper. He's not making barrels anymore. His wife answers the door with shaking hands and asks if you will bleed him. "He says he's full of poison," she whispers. You nod. That sounds about right. Inside, the man is lying on a bench, his chest bare, a bubo under his arm, bulging like a rotten pear. He groans. You pull out your lancet and hold it up to the light. It glints. He looks at it as if it might be his salvation. You know better. You make the incision. Blood pours out, thick and dark. He screams, convulses, and then lies still. His eyes roll back. His wife rushes to his side. "He's sleeping," she says hopefully. You say nothing. You just clean your lancet, rewrap it, and move on. Bloodletting, the ancient cornerstone of medicine. Galen swore by it. Hippocrates, too. The idea is simple. Bad humours collect in the blood, and by removing some of that blood, you restore the body's natural balance. The practice sounds tidy on parchment, but it is far less so in person. You have drained more men than you care to count, and most of them still ended up in the pit. Perhaps they would have gotten there sooner without you, or perhaps you merely gave them something else to worry about in their final hours. Next house, a young woman in a back room. Her mother insists on onion poultices. You nod. Why not? You help her crush a few bulbs, spread them on a cloth, and wrap them around the girl's swollen neck. The air fills with the sharp sting of sulphur. She gags. So do you. You try cupping next. You light a flame inside a glass jar and press it against her skin. The suction raises a welt. It's meant to draw out the plague or the fever or the evil spirits, depending on who you ask. All you know for sure is that it leaves marks. Whether it actually helps is anyone's guess. She cries when you leave, not because of the pain, but because she can tell by your silence that she is not getting any better. There's a barber surgeon on the other side of town. You saw him once attempt cauterization, lancing a bubo with a red-hot poker. The sound the patient made still haunts your dreams, the room filled with the stench of burnt flesh and melted pus. The man didn't survive the night, but the surgeon called it progress. "At least we learned something," he said. "You've learned something too. You would rather be ignorant than repeat that." You check in at the apothecary, but he has locked his doors. A sign hangs outside. No new medicines, no old ones either. Fair enough. His shelves are probably bare. You remember a time when your cane taps a rhythm on the cobblestones as you walk past a row of shuttered windows. Somewhere behind one of them, a man coughs violently. It doesn't sound like the plague, but it doesn't sound good either. You keep walking. You reach the old granary, which has been turned into a pest house. The sick lie on beds of straw, some groaning, some motionless. You kneel beside a boy no older than 12. He's barely breathing. His skin is cold, his lips are cracked. His eyes open when you speak, but he doesn't answer. You offer him some water, soaked with a few drops of elderflower extract. It just trickles from his chin. You pat it dry. He smiles faintly and then he closes his eyes. You mark a small X in your ledger. Not for his name, you never got it. Just for his location. You stand up, your bones aching, and you move on. In the far corner, a man gestures to you. "Doctor?" he says. "My wife." You follow him to a side room. She lies curled in a heap of blankets, her breathing shallow. He asks you if you will try the leeches. You hesitate. You haven't used them in weeks. They rarely survive for long in your pouch. But today, miraculously, one of them stirs. You place the creature on her wrist. It latches on. The man watches wide-eyed as it swells with her blood. "Is that good?" he asks. You nod. It's doing something. Whether that something is helpful, no one really knows. But the sight of it seems to give him hope. So you let it feed. Back outside, the sun is beginning to dip below the rooftops. The sky is turning the color of old bruises. You rest on a bench and examine your hands. They smell of vinegar, iron, and fear. You remember when you used to write notes on your gloves to keep your mind sharp. Now they're blank. There's no point. Every patient is the same. Every result is predictable. You recall a joke someone told you months ago. The plague doctor's toolkit includes a stick, a knife, and a prayer. You laughed at the time. Now it feels more like an inventory list. You make your way home, but the walk feels longer tonight. The houses all blur together, just wood and stone wrapped around quiet suffering. You try not to look into the windows. You don't want to see the eyes that are watching you, hoping you'll stop, hoping you'll fix something. When you finally reach your lodgings, you lay your tools out on the table, one by one. The spoon, the lancet, the empty bottles, the leech jar, still twitching. You line them up like soldiers before a battle. Then you just sit and you stare. It's all nonsense. Every single instrument, every concoction, every half-remembered method from the half-mad physicians of centuries past. You pretend it helps, because pretending is the only thing left between you and complete despair. But deep down, you know the truth. Your tools are not meant to heal. They are symbols, props in a tragic play you never auditioned for. They exist so that the dying may believe that someone is trying, that someone still cares enough to do something, even if that something is utterly and completely useless. You write in your journal, attempted bloodletting, no result. Applied onion poultice, no result. Cupping, mild blistering. Leeches, inconclusive. Vinegar infusions, psychological effect only. Prognosis for all, poor. You stop. The ink pools beneath your quill. Your hand is trembling. You light a candle, not for the light, but for the warmth. The mask hangs beside you, its empty eyes reflecting the flame. You almost ask it a question, almost. Instead, you close your eyes and whisper the only diagnosis that has never been wrong. We did all we could. And then, in the quiet that follows, we just don't know what we're doing. The trouble with being a plague doctor isn't just the death, it's what comes after it, or rather, who comes after it. You are not just the man who arrives when someone falls ill. You are the man who must explain why they never recovered. And people don't like explanations. They like scapegoats. At first, they had called you brave. They appointed you with a ceremony, a little purse of silver for your troubles, and a handshake so brief could hardly be called human contact. You were the man in the mask, the protector, the one who would stand between the town and death. But now you are the man who walks into a house and leaves it cursed. You are the man whose very presence means the end is nigh. The black-robed harbinger of failure. You see it in their eyes. They used to plead with you, now they glare. The mask that once inspired some small confidence has now become a symbol of doom. They whisper that you bring the plague with you, that your clothes carry it, that your cane spreads it, that your very breath poisons the rooms you enter. And they're not entirely wrong. You have lost count of how many infected households you have walked through, how many bodies you have brushed past, how many of the sick you have examined with trembling hands, all the while pretending that the oil on your gloves is enough to stop what is coming. If the disease lingers in the air or clings to fabric, then yes, perhaps you do carry death on your shoulders like a shawl, but the truth doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that someone must be blamed, and the dead cannot answer for themselves. So the masked man must.
It begins subtly. The baker refuses to open his door when you pass by. The innkeeper, who once offered you warm broth, now averts his gaze. A priest fails to mention your name in his prayers for the healers. Small things. Then the accusations come. A grieving widow screams at you in the street, swearing that her husband was perfectly healthy until your visit. A child throws a stone at you. A man in the square claims he saw you spit into a well. You try to explain that you have done nothing wrong, that you have followed the advice of the ancients, burned the right herbs, and carried out the prescribed rituals. But your voice is filtered through a beak, muffled and distant. No one hears you.
Soon you learn not to walk alone. You carry your cane like a staff, not just to examine buboes from a distance, but to ward off the living. You keep your head low and you speak only when you are spoken to. You become a shadow, a necessary evil. And you're not the only one. You hear stories from other towns of plague doctors being run out of villages at knife point. One was beaten to death outside a chapel. Another was drowned in a canal. Not all of them were innocent, but most of them were just unlucky. You meet a fellow doctor on the outskirts of town one morning. His robes are torn, his mask is cracked. He tells you he has been sleeping in barns, moving only by night. They think I killed their mayor, he says with a bitter laugh. I told them he had no humours left to balance. Didn't help. You share a stale biscuit and you part ways before sunrise. Neither of you expects to ever meet again. Back in your own town, you are summoned to speak with the mayor, not the one you just heard about. Yours is still clinging to life and to power, though you're not sure which one more tenaciously. You are led into a hall that has been draped with black cloth. The air smells of incense and bureaucracy. He tells you plainly, the townsfolk are frightened. They want answers. They want to know the plague isn't getting worse. You nod and you say what he wants to hear, that the numbers are steady, that the isolation measures are helping, that the latest batch of rosemary is especially potent. He nods in return, satisfied not by the truth, but by the sound of certainty. He instructs you to write a public notice, affirming the town's containment strategy. You do so, signing your name with a flourish that feels both pompous and pitiful. That evening, the paper is nailed to a post in the town square. By morning, it has been defaced. Someone has drawn a skull over your name. You try to ignore it. There is a man in the poor quarter who has made it his personal mission to convince others that you are an agent of death. He walks from house to house, whispering that the plague did not truly return until you did. He tells them that your herbs are lies, that your mask is a demon's face, that the stick you carry was once a branch from a gallows tree. None of it is true, but again, truth is irrelevant. What matters is fear. And in the theatre of fear, you are a perfect villain, masked, silent, strange. You carry no sword, you bear no shield, only blood-stained gloves and a ledger full of names that never lived to be crossed off. You begin to lose sleep. Not from illness, not yet, but from dread. Each knock on a new door is met with suspicion. Each alley feels like a trap. Children chant songs behind your back. Crowman, stay away. Mother died the other day. Crowman knocked and then she coughed. Now her soul is carried off. You try to focus on your work, but your hands tremble more than they used to. You double-check every step. You speak gently, cautiously, like a man tiptoeing through a forest of broken glass. The tools in your kit feel heavier now, not because they have changed, but because they no longer feel like instruments of healing, just props in a ritual that satisfies no one. You bleed a man who thanks you with tears in his eyes. He dies that night. His wife blames you. His brother sharpens a knife. The mayor sends guards to accompany you on your house calls. It feels less like protection and more like containment. The guards don't speak to you unless it is absolutely necessary. They cover their own faces, but not out of fear of the plague, but out of fear of association. You're not a doctor now. You are a danger, managed by force. One afternoon, you are summoned again, this time to a church where a priest has fallen ill. He is lying on the altar steps, surrounded by candles. The congregation watches from a distance. You kneel beside him. You check his pulse, his breath. He is dying. You offer him comfort, not a cure. Later that evening, someone accuses you of poisoning the holy water. They claim the priest would still be alive, if not for your presence. You are questioned by the mayor's clerk. You answer with the same weary tone you use for everyone now, flat even, devoid of all expectation. You are cleared, but you are not forgiven. Eventually, you begin walking at dusk instead of dawn. Fewer eyes, fewer shouts. You move quickly, efficiently, like a ghost moving through smoke. You visit the sick, you mark your notes, you apply your herbs. You say the prayers, though you're not sure you believe them anymore. You leave before the candle burns down. Some patients don't let you in at all. They say they would rather die alone than die under your watch. You respect their choice. You add their names to your list with a heavy hand. One night you find a message scrolled on your door. Go back to the pit you came from. Another reads, your mask hides your guilt. You burn them both. You have learned now that medicine is not enough, that science cannot defend you, that the truth, when people are dying, has all the weight of smoke in a hurricane. You speak less, you write more, you pray quietly, and you work quickly. You leave no trace. You are no longer just a plague doctor. You are a man dodging the knife's edge of fear. And you are learning more each day that the plague does not always kill with a fever. Sometimes it kills with blame, and you are running out of ways to survive both. At first, you didn't even notice them. The rats. They were just background noise, a part of the scenery. Scurrying along the gutters, rummaging through the refuge piles, slipping beneath doors and floorboards. There had always been rats, especially in a town like this, where food was never stored quite right, and the streets were never cleaned quite thoroughly. But now they are everywhere. And worse, they are fearless. You step outside one morning and you see one sitting right on your doorstep, grooming itself. It pauses only briefly when it sees you, then it resumes as if to say, "Go on then." You wave your cane at it. It trots away slowly, without any urgency, as though it is giving you the courtesy of pretending that you are still in charge. The rats do not fear the living, and they certainly do not respect the dead. You have seen them climbing onto the plague carts, nosing at limbs that are protruding from hastily wrapped shrouds. You have seen them squirm beneath the boards of the churchyard fence, gnawing at soil that has been freshly turned. Once you watched one drag a piece of something, flesh, most likely, from a pile of rags behind the apothecary. You told yourself it was just a scrap of cloth. You didn't believe it, and you have heard them too. In the silence of a late-night visit, when the household has finally stopped pleading and the patient is gone, there is always the sound of scurrying in the walls, in the rafters. Sometimes it's under the very floorboards you are kneeling on. The rats are waiting. They are always waiting. Of course, no one blames the rats. Not officially. The clergy blames sin. The mayor blames travellers and bad harvests. The barber surgeons blame the stars or the season. And the common folk, well, they blame you. But you have started to wonder if the rats were here all along, as much a part of the plague as the pustules and the fear. Perhaps they are not just a symptom, but the cause. You heard it first from a spice merchant who had read it in a pamphlet from the coast that fleas on rats may carry the sickness. The idea was laughed out of the tavern, but it lodged itself in your mind like a splinter. You started paying more attention, and what you noticed was this. Where the rats were most numerous, the plague bloomed with a cruel precision. In the alley behind the granary, there were rats by the dozen. 4 houses became infected. Along the fishmonger's row, where scraps piled up in the street, there were more rats. 2 more homes were lost. A coincidence, perhaps. But then again, what isn't these days? Today you are called to a weaver's home, a crooked little structure with a collapsing roof and a hole in the side wall that's big enough to admit a dog or a dozen rats. You knock, you wait, and then you push the door open gently with your cane. Inside, the air is heavy with dust and sickness. The weaver lies on a cot near the hearth, her skin blotchy, her neck swollen. But that's not what draws your attention. It's the corner behind her, a nest of rags piled high, and it's twitching. You move closer. A rat darts out and vanishes beneath the floorboards. Another one peeks out from a crack in the wall. The patient groans. You look down and you realize that one of them has chewed right through her stocking. You finish the visit quickly. There is nothing more to be done. You leave behind a sprig of rosemary and a warning to burn her linens. She won't. No one does. Outside, you ask the neighbor if anyone has been laying traps. She just shrugs. "What's the point?" she says. "There's always more." And she's right. You have never seen so many. They travel in packs now. They are bold enough to raid storerooms in broad daylight, to climb up walls and into rafters. One night, you saw a whole cluster of them swimming across the canal. For a moment, you thought you were hallucinating, but no, they were just adapting. Thriving. You begin walking with a heavier step. You thump your cane on the ground more often. You tell yourself it's to ward off evil. Really, it's to startle the rats. The town's sanitation is, in a word, medieval. Waste is dumped directly into the street. Food is stored in damp cellars. Water comes from wells that are dug too close to the latrines. The gutters are clogged with rot. The rain doesn't wash anything clean. It just spreads the filth even further. You have tried to raise the issue. The mayor's clerk nodded solemnly and said, "We're prioritizing prayers." You visit the pest house in the West Quarter. A young boy there is crying, his leg covered in bite marks. His mother swears he was attacked in his sleep. You believe her? The rats don't wait anymore. If a body is still, it is fair game. You try to seal your own lodgings more thoroughly. You stuff cloth into the cracks beneath the door. You plug holes in the walls with wax and old rags. And still, you hear them at night. The scratching, the skittering, the occasional squeal. One morning, you wake to find droppings near your medical kit. You vomit in the hearth, you light a new fire, and you begin scrubbing your tools for the third time that week. You have started to dream about them. Dreams where they speak to you, where they watch you from high places with their beady black eyes. In one dream, they are wearing tiny masks just like yours. In another, they are walking upright, carrying your cane and mocking your voice. "Doctor," they say, "we have come to help." You don't tell anyone about the dreams. You hear that in other cities, they have begun experimenting with poison, a mixture of ash and ground glass, slipped into lard and spread where the rats feast. You make a batch yourself, carefully wearing your gloves. You set it out by the bakery ruins, where the rats cluster thickest. You return 2 days later. The poison is gone. The rats are still there, fatter, if anything. One evening you return home to find your bed has been torn. A rat has nested in it. You don't scream, you don't curse. You simply sit down on the floor and stare. Eventually you rise, you remake the bed, and you double your own mask's straps before you try to sleep. You have started marking the rats in your ledger. Not formally, just small notches beside the entries, one for each sighting. You no longer bother distinguishing between plague deaths and vermin activity. At this point, it all just blends together. You consider writing to someone, a physician in a larger city maybe, or one of those university men who claims to understand natural philosophy. But you know what they will say. Interesting theory, needs more proof. Meanwhile, another dozen people will die. The clergy still preaches that the plague is a punishment from God. The sermons ring out from the chapel ruins, echoing through the empty streets. One friar claims that the cats are to blame, that they are witches in disguise. Some towns begin killing cats en masse. The rat population doubles within a week. Doubles. You bring the matter to the mayor again. You urge him to order street cleaning, pest control, basic sanitation. He just rubs his temples and says, "People are dying, doctor. I don't have time for rats." You resist the urge to laugh in his face. The next morning, you attend to a family of 6, all of them infected. The father dies during your visit. The youngest child, a girl with missing teeth and matted hair, tugs at your sleeve and says, "I saw the rat climb into his mouth last night." You excuse yourself and you vomit in the alley. You begin wearing thicker boots, tucking your cloak tighter around your legs, wrapping your bedroll in oilskin, and sleeping with your cane laid across your chest. You don't fear the plague anymore, not in the same way. You fear what comes before it, what scurries in and lays its claim to the body before the fever even begins. You return one day to a street you had thought was empty. You find rats fighting in the open, not over food, but over territory. One bites another's throat clean through. It squeals and it twitches and it dies. The victor drags the carcass into a drain. You back away slowly. You stop recording the names of patients. You start recording rat nests. The granary, the tanner's shed, the old stable near the wall, the church vault. You tell yourself it is for the good of the town, that if anyone survives this, they will want to know where to begin rebuilding. where to dig, where to burn, but a part of you knows the truth. The rats are not going anywhere. They are not a symptom. They are not a side effect. They are the inheritors of this town. You are just passing through. And as you walk the alleys at dusk, stick in hand, boots heavy, mask suffocating, you feel it in your bones. You can't outrun the rats. You never could. When you first put on the plague doctor's robe and mask, you thought you were stepping into a role of salvation, a healer standing tall amid the despair. You imagined that your presence might be able to stem the tide of death, that your skills and your care could actually make a difference. But almost immediately you learned the harsh reality. Your role was far less heroic and far more tragic. You were hired to die. No one ever said it outright, of course, but it was understood. The town needed someone to stand at the very front lines of the disaster, to tend to the sick and to confront the plague face to face. You were that person, the shield between the dead and the living. Yet, like all shields, you were expected to bear the brunt of the attack and eventually to break. Your appointment was less about your skill and more about your availability and your willingness. Many of the city's doctors had already fled. Some had taken safer posts. Others had simply closed their doors and were hoping the plague would just pass them by. You, however, had answered the call, whether you were driven by duty or desperation or just circumstance, and you found yourself in a lonely, dangerous position. Your payment had come in advance, a cruel but practical decision made by the town's leaders. They knew the odds were against you, so they offered your family some small security, should you perish. It was a grim gift, a promise that you might not be coming back. Your days passed in a blur of sickness and death. You would rise before the dawn and don the heavy, waxed robes that covered you from head to toe. The mask, with its bird-like beak stuffed with aromatic herbs, sat heavy on your face, a barrier against the invisible and terrible threat that was in the air. Your tools were few and simple, lancets that were dulled by repeated use, brittle leeches that were barely clinging to life, and jars filled with vinegars and herbs that were steeped in the hopes of past generations. Bloodletting, cupping, and cautery, treatments that were rooted in centuries-old traditions, were your entire arsenal. Sometimes they seemed to help. More often, they did not. You watched countless patients fade away despite your best efforts, their lives slipping like sand through your fingers. You kept a ledger, a record of the sick, the dead, and the surviving. Names and dates that all blurred together, each one a small, private tragedy. The promised rewards for your service, land, money, or prestige, seemed like hollow echoes from a distant world. Many who donned the mask did not live long enough to claim their prize. Widows and orphans bore the brunt of that loss, all alone. You heard of others like you sent from distant villages as expendable shields, strangers arriving to a city that was already overcome with fear. Many of them died alone in shadowed rooms, their stories lost to the dust. And those who tried to flee were hunted down and punished. The plague spared no one, and neither did the city. Politics added a layer of poison to the already heavy air. Aligning yourself with the mayor or the clergy might grant you temporary safety, but alienating either one could spell exile or worse. The clergy watched you with suspicion, knowing that your very presence was a reminder of mortality itself. The townsfolk whispered curses behind their hands. They avoided your gaze, and their children fled from your path in terror. Fear had turned neighbors into enemies, and you had become both a symbol and a scapegoat. Violence was a constant threat. One night, a mob nearly surrounded you, stones flying through the air, and voices shrieking accusations. The guards rescued you, but their eyes held no warmth, only a reluctant sense of duty. You became a man apart, cloaked in black robes and a mask that hid your humanity. You were a living exile in your own city, yet, in the rare moments of solitude, you dreamed of a world beyond the plague, a world where masks could be removed without fear, where fresh air could be breathed freely, where laughter had replaced the screams. But the dawn always brought with it the stark, cold light of another day's tally of sickness and death. Your own body began to betray you. Your nights were broken by fits of coughing, your days by an exhaustion so deep it nearly overwhelmed you. You told yourself it was just fatigue, but deep inside you feared the slow poison of the plague. The mayor would summon you often, demanding reports and, more than that, hope. You offered what little you could, balancing the truth with necessity, trying to prevent mass panic. You enforced the quarantines, watching as families were torn apart, as loved ones were isolated in cold pest houses. Many of them never returned. You questioned the morality of it all, but you spoke only in silence. You watched your colleagues fall to sickness and despair, their bodies wasting away, their spirits breaking. You clung to your journal as a refuge in the chaos, recording symptoms, treatments, and the occasional glimmers of success. Despite the odds, you returned to your work each day, not out of hope, but out of a sense of duty. At night, lying awake with the mask resting beside your bed, you would whisper vows to endure for as long as you had breath remaining, to ensure that your sacrifice would not be forgotten, even if your name faded from memory. Your senses had sharpened with each passing day. The scent of decay, the sight of swollen buboes, the distant wail of grief, they all became familiar, nearly normal. You learned to walk that fine line between compassion and self-preservation, between caring and despair. Every step you took was a gamble. Every patient was a potential final encounter. You started noticing the small things, the flicker of candlelight behind the shuttered windows, the hushed prayers that were whispered in the empty streets, the way the rats seemed to grow bolder by the day, scurrying freely beneath piles of refuse and even over bodies that had been left unattended. The rats, you realized, were as much a part of the plague as the disease itself. Your cloak, which was once a barrier, now felt like a shroud, the mask a suffocating burden. But you wore them still because to remove them was to invite death that much closer. You learned to seal every opening, to scrub your tools obsessively, to avoid the sickest patients when you could. Still, the plague found its way through the cracks and the pores, into the flesh and the bone. There were moments of bleak humor, a dark laughter that was born from sheer desperation. You joked with a colleague about how the plague was the town's most effective tax collector, never missing a single payment. You laughed bitterly at the absurdity of it all, the rituals and the remedies that were no more than superstition. Yet beneath the humor there lay a deep sadness. You had lost friends, neighbors, perhaps even family, to the same fate you were now facing daily. The city's life seemed to be draining away, replaced by silence and sorrow. You often wondered who would survive this nightmare, if anyone would, and what the world would look like when the plague finally lifted. You remembered the very first patient you could not save, the child whose eyes had met yours in a mixture of confusion and fear. You carried that moment with you, a weight that was heavier than any cloak or mask. It was what drove you forward, even as your own strength began to wane. Your health declined steadily. You found yourself increasingly fatigued, haunted by fevers and chills. You wondered if you were already infected, but fear alone was not a reason to stop. There were still those who needed your care, and duties that no one else would fulfill. The nights grew longer and darker, and your dreams were plagued by shadows. You dreamed of rats wearing your mask, of the dead rising, of being trapped in a world where the air itself was poison. You did not share these dreams. There was little comfort to be found in fear. You began to prepare for the inevitable. You wrote letters to your family, hoping they might understand your sacrifice. You made peace with the idea that your name might be lost to history, your story untold. Yet you clung stubbornly to your duty, knowing that your stand was buying time for others. In your final weeks, you moved more slowly, your steps heavier, yet your resolve remained strong. You continued to visit the sick, to comfort the dying, to carry the bodies away. You were the last barrier, the thin line between the plague and the living. And when your time came, as it surely would, you accepted it, not with fear, but with a grim sense of purpose. You had served your role, you had faced the darkness, you had endured for as long as you possibly could. You were hired to die. Your life was the price that was paid for a city's fleeting chance to survive. And in that sacrifice there lay a somber dignity that few could ever understand. The days grow darker, and the air becomes heavier with the smell of smoke and sorrow. You find yourself no longer just a healer or a witness, but the grim conductor of death's procession. Cart after cart rumbles through the narrow streets, piled high with bodies that are wrapped in hastily sewn shrouds. Their weight is a crushing reminder of just how many lives the plague has claimed. Your hands, which were once steady with medicine and compassion, are now calloused and raw from hauling the corpses onto the carts, from dragging them out of homes where the living no longer remain. Each body is another story that has ended, another family that has been shattered. You once wrote down their names, but now you record only numbers. The sheer volume of death has rendered individual identities impossible to maintain. The smell of burning is constant. Clothes, bedding, and even entire homes are set aflame to try and prevent the spread of the disease. The flames lick at the sky, turning the dusk a fiery red, the smoke thick and suffocating. You often pause by the pyres, watching as the dead are consumed, the crackling of the fire a grim lullaby for the dying city. A numbness has settled in your heart. You have stopped feeling fear or sorrow in the same way you once did. The dead do not frighten you anymore. It is the silence of the living that chills you to the bone. The empty streets, the shuttered windows, the complete absence of children's laughter haunt your every step. The death of a child, though, still cuts differently. Once, the small body of a girl was brought to you, her breaths shallow, her skin pale. You held her frail hand, and you felt a flicker of something that the plague had not yet managed to consume: hope. But when she slipped away, that hope died too, leaving behind only an aching emptiness. After that, the faces all blurred into one another. Pain became a constant companion, but your heart grew harder, a necessary shield. Your duties now extend beyond the sick and the dead. You mark homes with chalk or with paint, a sign to others that death has visited. These marks are warnings, barriers to keep the living from entering spaces that are saturated with contagion. Sometimes you see neighbors avoiding these houses altogether, leaving the abandoned to rot, their histories buried beneath layers of dust and sorrow. At times, the sound of the funeral carts is the only noise in the city. Their wheels groan under the weight, their paths winding endlessly towards the outskirts, where the graves are being dug in hastily prepared pits. There is no ceremony, no prayers said by the mourners. Only the cold efficiency of survival now dictates the pace. Your own exhaustion grows heavier with each passing day. The physical toll of moving bodies and setting fires is compounded by the mental burden of witnessing such relentless death. Sleep has become a distant memory, and nightmares invade the rare moments of rest you are able to snatch. You dream of flames consuming not just the dead, but the living as well. Despite the horror, life stubbornly clings to the edges of the city. You see birds cautiously returning to the rooftops and stray cats weaving their way through the alleys. Sometimes a lone child will slip out to watch the fires, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. These small signs remind you that the world beyond the plague still persists, a fragile hope in the midst of all this devastation. You find yourself reflecting on the ritual of burial, on how death once meant community, remembrance, and respect. Now, it is hurried and anonymous, dictated by necessity rather than reverence. The quiet graves on the city's edge are filled with nameless bodies, a testament to lives that have been erased without ceremony. The scent of smoke, ash, and decay fills your senses constantly. It clings to your clothes, your skin, your breath. You wash as often as you can, but the smell always lingers, a reminder that death follows you everywhere. Even when you close your eyes, the image of the burning pyres is seared into your mind. At night, the city is eerily silent, except for the crackle of distant flames and the occasional wail of grief that is carried on the wind. You lie awake, listening to the sounds that mark the end of another day, the last breath that was taken, the final flicker of a candle, the slow extinguishing of a life. You wonder how many more days like this you can possibly endure, how many more bodies you will have to carry, how many more fires you will have to light. The weight of it all presses down on your soul, but you have no choice but to continue. The city needs you, even if it cannot say so. One evening, you watch as a young boy is brought to the pest house, his small body covered in sores and bruises. His mother follows silently behind, tears streaming down her face. You place your hand on the boy's fevered brow, and you promise him comfort, though you know all too well that the chances are slim. The boy's frightened eyes meet yours for just a brief moment, and in that moment, the enormity of your role strikes you anew. You have become more than a healer or a witness. You are the keeper of memories, the guardian of a city's final moments. The dead have ceased to frighten you. It is the silence of the living, the absence of voices and laughter that haunts you most deeply. The fires you light burn not only the bodies, but also the fragments of a life that was once lived. You think of the families that are now broken, the homes that have been abandoned, the futures that have been erased. The weight of all this sorrow is almost unbearable. Yet you carry it silently, determined to serve until your own strength finally fails. Each day blends into the next. The smell of smoke and ash is a constant companion, mingling with the metallic tang of blood and the sickly sweet scent of decay. You breathe it all in, a bitter perfume that clings to your very being. You find small moments of grace in the midst of the devastation. A brief smile from a survivor. A flower blooming defiantly in a cracked stone wall. A bird's song breaking the silence. These fleeting glimpses remind you that life persists even in the darkest of times. Yet the burden of your task never lightens. You continue to cart away the dead, to mark the homes, to tend to the few who remain. Your hands grow rough, your heart heavy. The city around you changes, its pulse slowing, its breath growing shallow. You wonder how many more fires you will set, how many more tears you will witness. The plague is relentless, and so is your duty. You are the unseen flame in the night, burning away the past to make way for a future you may never see. Your nights are restless, filled with dreams of flames and shadows. Sometimes you dream of the faces of those you could not save, their eyes accusing and sad. You wake with a start, your heart pounding, the memory lingering like smoke in the air. Despite the exhaustion and the sorrow, you press on. There is no choice. The city needs you to carry this burden, to hold the line until the plague finally passes. You are the quiet force at the city's heart, the last light against the encroaching darkness. One day, as you prepare to leave the pest house, a woman approaches you, her eyes red from her tears. She is clutching a small bundle, a child who is barely alive. She begs you to do what you can. You nod, your hand steady despite your weariness. You take the child into your care, knowing the odds, but refusing to surrender hope. You have become the bearer of grief and the bearer of fragile hope. Your days are spent in the shadow of death, but your heart clings to the possibility of life. You are the city's silent sentinel, standing watch over its last breaths. The fires you light are both destruction and cleansing. They burn away the plague's physical toll and the sorrow that threatens to consume the living. In their glow, you see the city's pain and its resilience intertwined. As the smoke rises into the night sky, you find yourself thinking of the future. A future where the streets will once again bustle with life, where children will play without fear, and where laughter will return. You carry this vision with you, a beacon in the darkness. The plague has taken so much, but it has not taken your resolve. You are a witness, a guardian, a healer of souls as much as bodies. You stand firm in the face of despair, carrying the city's sorrow with dignity and strength. With every fire you have set, every body you have tended, every home you have marked, you are writing a story of endurance and sacrifice. Your role is grim, but it is vital. You are the thread that holds the city's fragile hope together. Though the days are long and the nights are longer, you find strength in your duty. You are the keeper of the city's memory, the guardian of its grief, and the harbinger of its eventual healing. The smoke that fills the sky is a reminder of both loss and renewal. You watch the flames dance and flicker, knowing that with the end of each fire, a small part of the plague's hold on this city weakens. You carry on step by heavy step, through the streets that are marked by death and sorrow. You carry on because the city needs you, even if it cannot say so aloud. In the quiet moments just before dawn, you breathe in the cold air, which is filled with smoke and ash. You close your eyes and you imagine a day when the fires no longer burn, when the city finally wakes from its long nightmare. Until then, you will stand watch. You will carry the bodies, you will light the fires, and you will mark the homes. You will carry the city's sorrow with a silent strength, a guardian in the funeral by firelight. And as the flames flicker and die, you find a strange comfort in their glow, a promise that even in the darkest of times, there is still light. The world of the plague doctors was one that was filled with hardship, but also with ridicule. From the very first day you donned your heavy, waxed cloak and the infamous beaked mask, you became a figure of mockery among those who also called themselves healers. The monks preached from their pulpits that the plague was a divine punishment, a scourge that was sent by God to chastise the sinners. Their remedy was prayer and repentance, and any other method was met with suspicion or even disdain. The barber surgeons flaunted their razors and their leeches, confident in the ancient art of bloodletting, certain that restoring the balance of the humours was the only true cure. They laughed at your costume and your potions, dismissing all of your efforts as foolishness. The apothecaries sold their exotic mixtures in their fragrant shops, promising cures that too often offered only false hope. Amidst this cacophony of belief and rivalry, you stood alone, the oddity that was wrapped in leather and herbs, wielding a wooden cane to keep your distance from the sick. Your mask, stuffed with its pungent herbs, was meant to protect you from the bad air, the miasma that was believed to spread the disease, but to many it was a symbol of fear and superstition. Children would run from you, adults would cross themselves, and whispers of curses would follow your steps. You were seen as a harbinger of death, a figure that was both feared and ridiculed. In the taverns and the town squares, fierce debates raged between the monks, the barbers, the apothecaries, and the doctors. You would often listen silently as they argued over the cause and the cure of the plague. The monks decried sin and demanded repentance. The barbers boasted of their bleeding skills. The apothecaries touted their latest remedies. When you were drawn into an argument, you would defend your observations and your cautious treatments, only to be met with scorn and accusations of heresy. Despite the mockery, you persevered. Every single day you risked your life tending to the sick and the dying, gathering notes and observing patterns to try and better understand this relentless killer. Your journals grew heavy with descriptions of symptoms, treatments that were attempted, and the outcomes that you observed. Some patients showed signs of relief, but many succumbed despite your every effort. Your methods were primitive, but they were grounded in experience and the desperate hope for some kind of a breakthrough. The plague had fractured the medical community, weakening the city's overall response. Instead of unity, there was rivalry and distrust. The monks urged prayers, the barbers bled their patients, and the apothecaries sold their potions. You stood somewhere between superstition and the very beginning of scientific thought, trying to bring some kind of order to the chaos. Hostility was common. On several occasions, you faced public challenges from barber surgeons who accused you of recklessness or quackery. You stood your ground, citing cases where your care had eased suffering or had prevented the spread. Some in the crowd would listen, but others would just jeer. Behind closed doors, a few expressed a grudging respect for your courage and your cautious approach. Yet, publicly, the mockery persisted. Small victories were what fueled your resolve. A child's fever breaking, a household being spared through quarantine, symptoms being relieved by your herbal infusions. These fragile hopes were what kept you moving through the darkness. But the city remained divided, its trust broken, its public health fragmented. None of them could stop the plague alone. Lonely nights followed, filled with the groans of the dying and the whispers of the fearful. The burden of isolation pressed heavily upon you, as did the constant threat of death. Yet you refused to falter. Your mask and your robes were more than just protective gear. They were symbols of endurance, of sacrifice, and of a flicker of hope that someday this nightmare would finally end. The city would survive, as it always had before. And when it did, it would remember those who had faced the darkness without retreating. True heroes, hidden beneath masks and robes, fighting not only a disease, but also ignorance and fear. Until that day, you would walk your lonely path, scorned but steadfast, the plague doctor, outcast, healer, and unsung protector. You spend long hours moving through the city's darkest corners, entering homes where hope has long since fled, and despair sits thick in the air. You carry with you not just your herbs and your remedies, but a heavy weight of responsibility. Families look to you with fear, with suspicion, but sometimes, just sometimes, with a faint glimmer of trust. In those moments, you feel the full burden and the blessing of your role, to be the thin line between death and mercy in a city that has been overwhelmed by the plague. Your robes, heavy and stiff with wax and leather, made you an odd sight. Children would run in terror at the sight of your bird-like mask, and some adults would cross themselves as you passed by. You were seen as both a harbinger of death and a fool, a contradiction that left you neither respected nor truly feared. You sought knowledge wherever you could find it, studying ancient texts and gathering the fragmented wisdom of those who had faced plagues before you. You experimented with herbal remedies, isolation tactics, and rudimentary hygiene measures. But every success was fleeting, every step forward was met with 2 steps back as the plague swept mercilessly through the city. The tension between you and the other medical practitioners was palpable. At times, you would attend councils where monks preached repentance, barbers demanded bloodletting, and apothecaries pushed their potions. Arguments would flare, voices would be raised, and the city's response to the plague would fracture even more. It was a war not just against the disease, but against ignorance, fear, and pride. In the quiet moments between the horrors, you would wonder if your efforts mattered at all. Yet, when a child's fever broke, or a family was spared from infection, those small victories would rekindle your resolve. You were a sentinel in a city that was under siege, a lone figure standing between life and death. And though you were mocked and feared and misunderstood, you embraced your role with a solemn dignity. The plague doctor was more than just a costume or a cure. It was a symbol of endurance, of sacrifice, and of the fragile hope that one day this nightmare would finally end. The reality of the plague was harsh. The days brought devastation, empty homes, deserted markets, and streets that were littered with death. The plague doctor was a constant presence amidst all this decay, a figure that was both reviled and relied upon. In some ways, your beaked mask became a talisman, a strange sort of protection, not only from the disease, but from the despair that threatened to overwhelm the city. You found yourself drawing strength from this symbol, even as others mocked it. There were moments when you questioned your own sanity. The endless exposure to death, the hostility of those around you, and the heavy burden of responsibility all pressed down upon your shoulders. But you would push these doubts aside, focusing only on the task at hand. When you moved through the city's alleys and courtyards, the whispers would follow you like shadows. People said the mask was cursed, that the plague doctor was an omen of doom. Yet some still dared to hope that you were a guardian, standing between the living and the dead. Your work was lonely, your rewards were few, but your resolve never wavered. You held on to the belief that even in the darkest of times, compassion and perseverance could make a difference. The city would eventually survive this plague, as cities had survived them before. And when it did, it would remember those who had faced the darkness without flinching. True heroes, hidden beneath their masks and robes, fighting not just the disease, but also ignorance and fear. Until that day, you would walk your lonely path, scorned but steadfast, the plague doctor, outcast, healer, and unsung protector. The plague had finally started to fade from the city's streets. The haunting sound of the death carts piled high with corpses had become less frequent, and the heavy silence that had once smothered every alley was beginning to lift. Windows that were once tightly shuttered against the deadly air were now cracking open to admit cautious beams of sunlight. Life, battered but persistent, was returning to a place that had seemed forsaken. You stand at the threshold of this fragile new dawn, removing the infamous beaked mask that has been both your shield and your burden. The weight of the mask lifting from your face does not bring the relief that you had hoped for. Instead, a new heaviness settles deep in your chest. Your reflection in a cracked mirror shows a man who has been changed by suffering. Hollow eyes rimmed with exhaustion, cheeks sunken from sleepless nights, and unending grief. The person you see is a ghost of the man you once were, forever marked by the plague. Those who survived look at you with a strange mixture of emotions. Gratitude mixed with suspicion, pity that is tinged with fear, and sometimes a thinly veiled contempt. To many, you are the plague incarnate, a walking symbol of death itself. Children shy away at your approach. Mothers clutch their own children closer. Even your old acquaintances now avoid your gaze. You try to shed the emotional armor that you wore for so long, the mask, the robes, the protective distance. But the memories cling to you stubbornly. The faces of the lost crowd your dreams like shadows. The screams, the stillness, the stench of decay, they invade your waking moments and your sleep alike. Night after night, you awaken gasping for breath, drenched in a cold sweat, your throat raw and aching as if the mask's weight is still pressing upon your lungs, the wooden canes slipping from your clammy hands. Your body bears the marks of the ordeal too. Bruises, cuts and burns from the long days of tending to the ill now throb with a lingering pain. Your hands tremble, recalling every life they touched and every body they lifted. A deep weariness has settled in your bones, a hollow ache that is lodged within your chest that no amount of rest can ever seem to ease. Yet the city begins its slow, tentative recovery. New life pushes up through the cracked stones and the burned earth. Flowers bloom where corpses once lay. Laughter cautiously returns to the bustling markets. Smoke rises from the chimneys, bearing the scent of cooking fires. The world is being reborn, but you feel estranged, a stranger among the living. The neighbors you once aided now avoid you, uncertain if you are a friend or a lingering curse. Rumors whisper that the plague doctor has gone mad, or that he still carries the sickness within him. These whispered fears cut deeper than any blade. You reach out, seeking connection, but you find only distance. The relentless grief and trauma have reshaped you, altering how you see yourself and the world. Simple conversations feel strange. Familiar faces now seem unfamiliar. You are isolated even among those who survived. The nights are the hardest. You find your way to the ruins of the old chapel, where the prayers for the dead still seem to echo among the crumbling stone. There, you kneel, whispering the names of those you lost too soon. Friends, strangers, the many you carried in your arms in their final moments. In this sacred silence, you seek a fragment of peace, a balm for your weary soul. Slowly, you come to understand that the plague's toll extends far beyond the bodies it claimed. It carved deep wounds into hearts and minds, scars that are invisible to the eye, but are no less real. The survivors all bear the weight of trauma, grief, and loss in ways that even time may never fully heal. Your story does not end with a triumphant celebration or a hero's welcome. It unfolds quietly in the slow, difficult work of healing both the city and yourself. You are a survivor of a nightmare that few will ever remember. A man who faced death, cloaked in leather and herbs, who carried hope in the midst of despair. Though you may never feel whole again, your courage stands as a beacon, a testament that even in the bleakest of times the human spirit endures.
As the days stretch longer and the seasons shift, you begin to reclaim fragments of your lost life. You relearn the gentle rhythm of sleep without the suffocating mask. You breathe deeply without dread, and you meet faces without flinching. Yet the memories, sharp and unyielding, remain. The weight of every soul that was lost, every failed treatment, every family that was torn apart, shadows your path. You find a new purpose in passing on what you have learned. In dimly lit rooms, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows, you share your stories of courage and caution. You teach the importance of observation, of isolation, and of compassion, the lessons that were hard-earned in the crucible of the plague. Your voice bridges the chasm between a dark past and a hopeful future. And though the mask no longer hides your face, the wisdom you now carry helps to shape a city that is determined to be better prepared.
Sometimes, when the night is at its deepest, you catch yourself reaching for the mask, a reflex that was born of years spent battling an unseen enemy. But each time you resist, anchoring yourself in the present, refusing to be haunted by the past. You stand quietly, listening to the distant church bells tolling for the dead, feeling the slow pulse of life reawakening in the streets. You understand now that the plague's shadow will never fully lift. It lives on in the stories, in the scars, and in the souls it touched. But within that shadow, you find a fragile peace. The city will grow and it will heal. New generations will dance in the fields where silence once reigned, and you will walk among them, forever changed, a living testament to survival. Your role as a plague doctor may be over, but your story, your sacrifice, and your lessons will endure. In time, you hope the world will be kinder, wiser, and more vigilant. For now, you just breathe deeply, unmasked, and you face the uncertain dawn. You are a survivor, a witness, a quiet hero, woven into the tapestry of a city that has been reborn. And though you may never feel whole again, your courage burns bright, a light against the darkest night. The days turn into weeks and the city slowly pulls itself from the jaws of death. The streets, once littered with abandoned belongings and the remnants of hurried burials, begin to clear. You see farmers returning to their fields, merchants reopening their shops, and the sound of children's laughter tentatively piercing the silence. Yet, amidst this revival, a deep emptiness clings within you. The scars of loss are not visible like wounds, they are etched into the soul, carried in the quiet moments when the world seems to be still. Each morning, you rise with a weariness that no amount of sleep can alleviate. The absence of your mask leaves your skin feeling exposed to the chill of the dawn, and you shiver not just from the cold, but from the memories that linger like a shadow at the edges of your mind. The nights are the hardest, when the dreams revisit you with a relentless vividness. You see the faces, friends, strangers, the innocent and the damned, each one frozen in their final moments. You hear the pleading whispers, the last gasps, the unbearable silence that always followed. You walk the streets trying to reclaim the life that was once yours. Yet the city looks unfamiliar, and you feel like a ghost, wandering through a place that no longer feels like home. People cross the road to avoid you. Mothers pull their children away when you pass by. Even those you once comforted now regard you with a sense of unease, as if you carry a darkness that no one dares to touch. The burden you bear is not only the weight of the dead, but the crushing loneliness of survival. You have lived through horrors that no words can fully capture, and that distance isolates you from others. The companionship you seek is elusive, replaced by a cold silence that presses in against your soul. Slowly, you begin to share your story, not the gruesome details that might terrify, but the lessons that were learned in the very depths of despair. You teach that vigilance and compassion are shields against the darkness. You speak of hygiene, of isolation, and of kindness as weapons that are stronger than any sword. Your words find reluctant ears. Some listen with hope, others with skepticism, but the seeds of knowledge are planted. In moments of quiet, you find small comforts. A warm fire, the gentle turning of pages in a well-worn book, the aroma of herbs tending to your weary body. These simple acts tether you to the world, reminding you that life, however fragile, still endures. The city rebuilds around you. New homes rise from the ashes. Gardens bloom where graves once marked the earth. The clatter of footsteps replaces the silence. Songs return to the air. Yet the memory of the plague still lingers, a shadow that will shape the future. You walk these streets changed and marked, carrying the story of survival. Your role as a plague doctor may have ended, but your journey continues. You are a witness to humanity's resilience and also to its fragility. Your scars, both seen and unseen, tell a story that must never be forgotten. As the dawn breaks over a city that is rising from its ruin, you breathe deeply, unmasked and unbroken, ready to face the uncertain future. The plague has passed, but your courage lights the way forward, a beacon in the lingering darkness.